that's why I chose today's topic. So today what I'd like to help everybody to do is maybe to gain a bit of a better understanding of what anxiety and social anxiety disorder is and what it looks like. I want to describe how it kind of feels for clients. I'm going to go through the different stages of social anxiety and really help you to understand what it's like in terms of clients' cognitions, what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, and maybe how they're acting in certain situations. Cognitive techniques, which maybe you can use whenever you work with your clients, and I'll give examples of some stuff that we can do with that, and also some behavioural techniques to aid in the client's recovery. So I think it's quite kind of practical stuff, but I think that the main foundation that I want to help today is for people to have a bit more of an understanding of what it is in quite simple kind of understanding of it. Okay, so what do we know about social anxiety? I put this slide in, it's just really to kind of help us all to be a bit more focused on what we're going to do today and to help us to kind of get the brain rolling this morning. So what I'm going to do is just take maybe 5 minutes and maybe think about some of these questions. I have a very similar slide towards the end of the presentation. It's just really to help learning and to help people to get into the mindset of what we're doing today. First thing I'd like you to do is just take 5 minutes and to answer some of these questions in your own time on a piece of paper. So the first thing I want you to maybe to have a think about is how would you define or how would you explain anxiety? What's your own understanding of anxiety, and how would you kind of describe that to a client? The second thing I want you to think about is how would you define and explain social anxiety? So how would you explain anxiety? How would you describe social anxiety? What's your understanding of it? Third question I want to think about is the stages of social anxiety. Are you aware of any particular stages of it, or what's your view on how the whole process happens? And the last two questions I want you to have a quick think about is, what do you think maintains it? As in, how do people still present with the symptoms despite the fact that we're all surrounded by people all the time? And at the moment, if I have a client who has social anxiety, what am I doing to help them at the moment? So just take some time and have those questions. So I'm just going to move on now. So what do you know about anxiety? Anxiety is an emotion. It's a feeling that we all get, and it is normal. Okay, so whenever we look at anxiety, we're always bearing in mind that it has a normal function. The function is to protect us. The function is to keep us safe. And whenever a client presents to us, what we're looking at is the degree of which anxiety is causing the person not to be able to function well in their lives. So we're looking at the degree of discomfort and how it's having an effect on them. I'm just wondering if people go mute. You can just hear a bit of background noise, if that's okay. Thank you. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of anxiety is we think we're in danger and our body responds. So anxiety is a very, very powerful tool that's been used for many, many years, and the job of it is to protect us. So whenever we think we're in danger, our body responds internally to what we think is going to happen to us. And if we think about it later on, is about all the different parts of the body that does respond whenever we do feel anxious, such as our concentration mightn't be functioning as well because we're focused on getting out of situations. We notice that maybe there's an increase in our heart rate, maybe in our breathing, a little bit of nausea. Okay, so all this has a purpose. The purpose is to get us out of danger, but it can present as quite difficult symptoms to people. A simple explanation that I use whenever I'm trying to help people understand anxiety, and I use this for children and for adolescents and adults, and it's quite simple. Anxiety can be seen as an overestimation of danger, or in one way, danger seems. A lot of images seem to be very, very scary, and an underestimation of how we're going to cope. So if this does happen, if this does occur, how am I going to cope with it? Anxiety affects our whole body. Okay, our thinking, like I said, people present sometimes and they say stuff like, I feel like I can't think clearly, or my brain goes all foggy. And it does that for a purpose, and the purpose of the brain is to get out of there, get out of trouble. So you're obviously not going to be able to do certain things whenever you feel this way. So a lot of this is about normalizing the client's experience and helping them to understand that what they're experiencing is quite normal. It's just obviously the context and degree of it and the mechanisms what's been using is quite different. And there's different types of anxiety disorders. So what I'm saying here is that anxiety, although it is overestimation of danger and underestimation of the ability to cope, a lot of anxiety disorders have specific little differences. And the one I'm focusing on today then is a social anxiety. Okay, so social anxiety. So the cognitive model whenever we talk about social anxiety, it's all about fear of negative evaluation is a hallmark feature. So people always think that they're going to be negatively evaluated or judged. If you go to the DSM-5 or ICD-10, you're going to get what the classic presenting symptoms are. But there has been changes to the DSM, the ICD over the last while. And really what there is a shift away from the term of social phobia to more social anxiety disorder. They're also looking at the duration criteria previously, requiring symptom durations of over 6 months only in people aged under 16. However, this has been extended. So I'm saying here is that now it's looking at more of a wider range of presenting, and not just the over 18-year-olds. And the emphasis is on recognizing whether the experience of anxiety is unreasonable or excessive. And a lot of this is to do with trying to understand the person's presenting problem and where they find that they're very, very anxious. So this is just, I'm going to use lots of pictures throughout this presentation, and it's just to kind of help learning and help to reinforce a point. You can see here you have a big tiger and a little cub. And often people who present think that other people see them in a very different light than the way that they are. Examples of what I've heard clients saying, this is just a snapshot of what I have heard people saying and why they do it. So whenever I'm trying to understand people's presentations, what I like to do is to understand specific details of what they do. So they might say stuff like, I find shopping difficult, or I find talking to people difficult, or they'll say lots, I find getting buses difficult. And our job is to try to understand what is it's going on for the client in terms of their thinking, their feeling, and what they're doing. So this is just an example of some stuff that people have said to me. I can't go shopping alone in case someone speaks to me. That's one example. And I think this person would have maybe worn headphones or only gone in with other people because they would have thought that if they went shopping, someone could have said something to them and it could have made them feel very anxious and they may not be able to respond to it. I carry my phone in my hand shopping in case I rob something. When I'm out with my friends, I carry a phone of things I can talk about, and I also make some notes. This is a young person said to me, I carry 2 pencil cases to school just in case the pencils make noise and I become the center of attention. I can't say no to people because I want everybody to like me. I was trapped. This is another example of a young girl who felt trapped in Lidl for 45 minutes because the self-service machine wasn't working, and she felt very, very anxious handling cash. and she also wasn't able to ask any staff how to get out. So she felt trapped and she had to call her mom to come in to help her. And all these are examples of situations which a lot of us might take for granted, but a lot of people do struggle, and they use a lot of very clever ways of trying to negotiate the world. So CBT model, what we're looking at here then is situations that present danger. So whenever the person presents to us, it's really useful to have a look at lots of different situations so we understand thinking pattern, the feeling where the person feels the anxiety, and the behaviours. What are they doing which may be maintaining a lot of this anxiety? And we're going into the details of this a little bit more as we go on. If there's any questions, by the way, please feel free to ask. So common social anxiety situations that people would present with is meeting people, public transport difficulties, shopping, buying items, exchanging items, playing certain activities, and many, many more. So the treatment involves stepping into the person's world and understanding life from their point of view. So CBT is all about really the devil's in the detail and trying to understand what exactly the person means whenever they're talking about things. Often they might give kind of vague answers to certain questions about what they might find anxious and what might provoke anxiety. And often the case is about trying to understand and unpack exactly what the person means to help us to understand what exactly they're doing and what they're thinking whenever they're in specific situations. Again, it's just a picture, which is a trip to supermarket isn't easy for everybody. A lot of people can find it very, very difficult. And whenever we're dealing with clients, the simple things such as getting on buses can be quite challenging. And it's important to understand what's the different parts of the person finds challenging, what do they think is going to happen. And this kind of allows us then to have a look at the framework as to what we're going to do for the person. So if you look at the supermarket, and the question here is, can you pick out some tasks that would increase anxiety in clients who have social anxiety? I've heard numerous different stories of people, for example, who use certain things, such as having a phone in their hand, because if I go into the shop with a phone in my hand, that means I'm less likely to be accused of stealing something. So this is a person who went in, and everything they went in with their phone, the belief that the phone kept them safe rather than themselves keeping them safe, that there wasn't any anxiety, there wasn't anything to worry about in the first place. A lot of people struggle with handling cash and with talking to people behind the counter. So there's lots of different things within an environment that can cause different difficulties. And our job is really to understand what those difficulties are, so that we can understand where the problems lie in terms of the thinking, and then it gives us a better way to be able to manage then the behavioural difficulties. So what maintains social anxiety? If you look at social anxiety, I like to describe it in three different ways, three different stages. We have the before, which is anticipatory anxiety. So this could be, for example, before the person leaves their house, what goes on in their head before they leave their house. We have the during stage, which is where the person is now in the social environment. And then we have the after stage of the postmortem stage. Okay, so in terms of anxiety, the first one may be a little bit of anxiety, the second one may be more fear, and the third one may also be anxiety or whatever the person is doing afterwards. I'm going to go into details, and this is really just to help us all to understand social anxiety and to be able to help the clients understand it, because once they know what's going on, I think it makes life a lot easier for them. The anticipatory stage, this is before the person leaves the house, for example. Okay. And at the bottom, you can see a person who's crossed their fingers and hoping that everything goes well. So in this stage, what normally happens is people engage in specific behaviours to start to think about the worst scenarios and believe that these will happen. Okay. So the mind's going to give them lots of unhelpful ideas about how bad it could go, and what they do is they tend to believe it. Think about all the ways that it could go wrong, okay? Focusing on how bad that it feels, and this may lead to avoidance or not going out in the first place. Planning escape routes and avoidance. So planning ways to get out of trouble. That could be, for example, spending a bit of time with somebody, or it could be just trying to figure out how they're going to get out of a situation before they've even got into the situation. Another thing that people might do is use what's called safety behaviours. Safety behaviours are things that people use or do to reduce anxiety, but it actually has the opposite effect in that it stops a person from learning, and in some cases it can increase the anxiety of the person. So typical, some safety behaviours that I heard from people is that they might rehearse what they're going to say. And I had some adolescents, for example, who would have had a stockpile of questions they're going to ask their friends or jokes they're going to ask their friends. And they would have spent time before they left the house writing all these questions out on their phone as ammunition or as ways to reduce anxiety whenever they're in situations. The problem with this is that the person doesn't know that they're actually very capable and very likable, regardless that they don't need this material. What happens is it stops them from learning. Other safety behaviours could be people who might think that they're going to sweat excessively, and what they might do is they might cover up or use more jackets to stop them from sweating. And the adverse effect of that is that the person ends up sweating even more. So a safety behaviour really is anything that the person does to reduce anxiety, but what it does is it has the opposite effect. It increases anxiety and it stops the person from learning. So this is the first stage, the anticipatory stage. The second stage is when the person is now speaking to other people which they may deem as dangerous. Now, some people think that it could be friends which are more dangerous, or it could be people who they don't know could be more dangerous. And it all boils down to what the person thinks is going to happen. So in some situations, people might be more conscious about their friends because they believe that the friends are going to judge them if they say something wrong. So therefore, there's a higher risk of danger. Some people might have the opposite effect. Some people might engage in activity for a period of time, and after a period of time, they might feel that the person is getting to know them a little bit too much, and then they might disengage in certain activities, for example, golf or other sports. So I've heard this can happen as well, where they have a history of kind of tapping in and tapping out of different activities, based on how dangerous that they think that the person might be thinking about them. So whenever the person goes into the second stage of the duration of during meeting someone, things kind of change in that now it's gone from more of an anxiety into a fear. And the person becomes excessively focused on what they think other people is thinking about them. So in a way, the person really isn't listening to what's being said. What they're doing instead is they're trying to second guess what the other person is thinking about them. So they're what's called mind reading. And they're also becoming very aware of how they are presenting themselves, okay, in terms of my thinking, in terms of what I should and shouldn't say, in terms of how I stand, how fluent I speak. Lots of different things the person becomes very, very preoccupied with. So they engage in mind reading, scanning, and selective attention. Mind reading is one of the classic things that people tend to do. It's where they believe that they know what the other person is thinking, and it's usually in a negative point of view. Scanning means that the person could be scanning themselves for anxiety or evidence that they're making a mistake, but they're also scanning the other person to see, is the person listening to what they're saying, okay? And selective attention basically means looking out for trouble. What's the person doing during a situation? They're looking out for different cues which indicate that they're in danger. People often become focused on certain things: what I say, how I say it, how I look, how I sound, how I feel. Do other people think that I'm boring? And with all of this kind of internal analysis going on, it's very hard to listen to what the person is saying, and they often miss certain things. Or else what might happen in certain situations is a person might come in with a stockpile of different phrases or jokes, and then they land them at the wrong time, and it's not really appropriate, or the conversation has moved on. Another key to this is a person there's an increase in self-focus, there's an increase in anxiety, and there's also in some conversations being missed, which I spoke about before. Okay, so we have the pre-anticipatory, and we have the during, but it doesn't stop there, because then what we have, sorry, right back here a little bit. What we have then afterwards is we have what's called the replay, or we have the postmortem. So in this stage, the person has left the conversation, but their mind hasn't left the conversation. And what they do is they tend to replay things which they should or could have said, okay? And this can last for a few minutes, or it can last for days, you know, and it's always the negative. It's always the stuff that it should or shouldn't have done. It's never on the more positive aspects of how the conversation went. So the person might replay all the events or parts of the interaction as evidence that the person messed up and needs to be more careful the next time. Okay, so a lot of things to pull out is kind of more evidence for, God, that was dangerous, but I got through it, but I need to do the same things the next time. Also, other things that you can see will be things such as a person might say, well, I kind of always text my mates afterwards because I want to make sure that we're okay and I didn't say something silly. Or maybe what I do is I tend to over apologize. So whenever you listen to the person's narrative, what you're really picking up on is what the person is thinking of what they're doing, because often what they're doing is maintaining the problem. Okay, so this we have to help people to understand a normalized situation, but also help them to see that some of these behaviors aren't helping them to get better. Okay, so just to recap, we have the anticipatory stage, we have the during stage, and then we have the postmortem. Now, the next bit I want to talk about is a little bit more about the during phase and some of the other technical things that maintain the problem. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time helping people to understand that. So like I said, one of the big things that maintains it is a person becomes self and an environmentally focused attention. So rather than listening to what's being said, the person is more focused on themselves. So people with social anxiety focus their attentions in ways that increase their anxiety in social situations. They focus most of their attention on themselves, including their physical symptoms of anxiety and their negative thoughts. So some people kind of, I suppose, go into their bodies and they realize, God, I feel very, very hot. I feel like I'm sweating. I wonder, can other people see that I'm sweating? I wonder, am I speaking correctly? I wonder, am I fluent? I wonder, and all of this self-focus is one of the things that stops people from learning, from listening, and from getting over the anxiety. They will also look around their environments for any evidence that they are in fact being negatively evaluated. For example, people laughing in another room, is someone looking in a different direction, is your friend not talking to me today? Is also, again, the person's looking out for danger. So other cues which we will not be aware of, they're becoming very, very focused on. Okay, why? Because they see it as dangerous and they're looking out for trouble in that way. So selective attention. So if this is what the problem is, well then what we're trying to help people to understand is that being self-focused is maintaining anxiety. So therefore it's important maybe to not be self-focused and more look outside, open up their eyes in a way and see the situation for what it is. So we're trying to help the person to become less self-focused. And we could do lots of behavioural experiments and things with clients to see how do they feel when they're in their heads a lot versus how do they feel when they're not in their heads a lot, just to help them to see how easier that it can be and how fluid it can be when that happens. And I'm going to talk about this later on, but video feedback is really useful to help clients to be observed and to see the true observable self, because in our head sometimes we have an image or a kind of a video of how bad we look or how bad we interact. And sometimes by agreeing, setting up a task, by videoing a task and replaying it to the client, it helps the client and you to have observable data where the two of you can talk about and see what was the actual performance of the person. Common negative thoughts that people often think about, again, if we're looking into the during things. I will say something stupid and other people will laugh. Other people are talking behind my back. I'm trembling, shaking, looking as bright red as a beetroot. I won't know what to say. People will think I'm very odd. So really, the probability of it happening and the cost if it does not happen. So what we're saying here is that often people have these very, very negative ideas and they carry these ideas into situations and they believe it's going to happen, and again, it's one of the maintaining features of this. Another thing that people tend to do is accepting that the thoughts are true. Okay, often the case, people come in and they accept it as being true, but they never stop and think, actually, I wonder, am I making a mistake here? Am I seeing things a little bit different, not clearly? And this is our job. Maybe it's to inject a little bit of self-doubt and to help the person understand that maybe the life they're living hasn't been that way, and that they are well able to cope in a variety of situations. Safety behaviours, okay? Safety behaviours are anything to reduce anxiety or perceived threat, but it actually maintains the problem. And safety behaviours are very, very clever things that people do to get by, using alcohol and drugs. And I've come across people who use this a lot in social situations and situations such as picking kids up from school, going to maybe school parties with their kids. A lot of different social things that people might use benzos, they might use alcohol, they might use lots of different things to get them by. Okay, not making eye contact. The problem with not making eye contact is that the person also doesn't. I suppose the person then fails to understand or fails to see that the other person may not be looking at them anyway. Okay, so if your eyes are down, you're obviously going to feel a little bit more anxious, but you're also, in a way, maintaining anxiety because you're not seeing that's not true. Okay, not contribute to discussions or meetings. Wearing specific clothes. So sometimes people wear specific clothes because they believe that if they wear the clothes that they want to wear, that they're going to be seen or that they're going to stand out more. So they might, for example, dress in black a lot, or they might use other means of trying to blend in. And again, part of the person's recovery is helping them to understand that they don't have to live this way. That even if they wear different clothes, it's not going to have the consequence which they think it's going to happen. Making excuses and leaving early, and this may be where the person feels the anxiety has got too much and they want to leave because if they stay in the situation any longer, something could have happened or they could have said something, etc. So again, trying to understand what the person is doing so that then we're able to put things back together again. Covering up the anxiety, cover up anxiety by using things such as excessive makeup. Okay, another thing. Perfectionistic behavior, being over-prepared, carrying anti-anxiety tablets with you, only talking to specific safe people. Okay, so some people might be okay, and some people might be very, very dangerous to speak to. So it's all about trying to understand where the person comes from, really getting into the story so we understand the mechanics of what's happening. Another thing that's really becoming a fore in terms of research is that people who are socially anxious tend to have excessively high social standards, and more than most of us, in terms that, and I use the metaphor of a kind of a library here, where people who have social anxiety sometimes tend to have a library of books full of shoulds and musts statements. Whereas a lot of us mightn't have those books. You know, we might have a couple of things which we know that we can't do. But the person then who has these libraries has to go back and check things and see, well, did I break this rule or did I do this? Whereas a lot of us may know and be aware of kind of social boundaries and how much that we can and can't do. So excessively high standards is something that people generally do talk about. The fear of insulting others and their version of what insulting is, and that can be very, very wide. What I should or what should it not say? High standard social engagement. I must sound smart. I must not stammer. I must not stutter. Lots of different things. So it's really useful to try to understand the person's point of view as to how social interactions should happen, to help them maybe to drop their standards and to live in the world like the rest of us. So a library of shoulds and musts rather than just a little handbook. So try to kind of use these metaphors to help people to understand some of the problems or the things that they may be doing. And then we'll go back on the last bit, which is the dwelling bit. Okay. Is there any questions so far, Anya? Oh, sorry.
No question. Oh, sorry.
No questions so far. Okay, perfect. Okay, so basically where I'm at the moment then is hopefully what I've done is I've given example or overview of what social anxiety presents like. So the first part, I think, in the treatment of social anxiety is normalizing the person's experience, listening to what they're saying and really stepping into their world and helping the person see the different stages and helping to understand the different things. So helping the person understand the problem using the CBT model of social anxiety, which I've kind of given you a very broad range of what it looks like. The next thing is what we were looking at, but maybe we getting the person to monitor their own social anxiety thoughts and behaviours. And diaries are a really useful way of doing this. And there are specific social anxiety diaries. But really what you're doing is you're getting the person to log whenever they're in certain situations, what are they thinking, feeling, and doing whenever they're in them. And what they'll notice is a lot of the common thoughts and a lot of similar behaviours start to come up. And what this provides us with is a really good foundation for treatment, and it helps them to become more aware of the things that they're doing and maybe some of the things that we need to not to do. Also part of treatment is to learn to identify safety behaviours. So to learn to realise that some things that I've been doing for a while actually is making me feel worse rather than feel better. Now helping the person to understand that what they're doing then is being brave and taking a risk and you know, to get better. And this is a conversation that may take a little bit of coaxing to have the person to understand that, you know what, it is important to drop these safety behaviours. Other things such as video feedback and help them to become more self-focused, but also help them to see that, you know what, maybe this isn't the best way of doing things. Cognitive techniques and behavioural techniques are really important. And I'm going to talk about this next. So once a person has the foundations of understanding, the next thing I want to do is we want to help them to understand that maybe some of their thinking hasn't been entirely true. Maybe there's certain thinking errors that the person has been doing for a period of time. So help them understand that maybe there's certain things that they're not doing or that they're misinterpreting. The next thing that we might be doing is help the person to challenge some of their thoughts. So errors first, challenging, and then maybe reframing situations and reframing how the person sees situations. And a lot of these tasks can be done by conversations. They can be done by writing the stuff out. And what you're really doing is you're kind of you're sowing the seeds of doubt, and that maybe the person's thinking hasn't been entirely correct, and that maybe there's another viewpoint which they can learn from. The next bit then will be behaviour, and behavioural techniques and exposure is fundamental really for the treatment of social anxiety. And I'm going to go through all this stuff in a minute, but what you're talking about here is exposure hierarchies. Modifying how the person sees himself, different exposure exercises based on what the person is presenting with or what their difficulties are, and also reviewing the situations afterwards, and also helping the person to be more aware of positive data logs or positive things that have happened in situations rather than being primed to look at some of the negative experiences. And the last thing then is to look at relapse prevention and to help the person to notice any of the patterns that they may be falling into whenever they may be becoming well, and also all of the material, all the learnings that they have had over the last few sessions. Okay, so hopefully you can see this, but what I did was I have a book which is referenced at the very end of this, and it's a really useful manual, and it's very straightforward, and it's also based on research. And I've taken different pictures to show you some of the materials that we use with clients. And the first thing is thinking errors. So once a client has spent time with you and the two of you kind of understand some of their difficulties, then it's important to help them to understand some of the common thinking errors that people who have social anxiety may have. And here's a list of lots of things which people might do. All or nothing thinking. What that basically means is that people think that situations are going to go two ways, right or wrong, and there isn't any grey area. There isn't area for right and wrong. So it's quite kind of dimensional like that. Another common problem that people think is that they can fortune tell. Okay, which they predict that something negative is going to happen in the future, as if you're gazing into a crystal ball. Or also another thing that is catastrophizing, which you tell yourself that the very worst thing is going to happen. So this is classic kind of thinking error, thinking that people have whenever they're social anxiety. One-dimensional, fortune telling, disqualifying the positives, which means that You tell yourself that the positive experiences didn't happen, so there wasn't anything good in the situation, that a lot of it was bad, because you're dwelling on certain shoulds and shouldn'ts and etc. So disqualifying the positive. So you help the person to talk to you more about some of the things which actually went okay. Emotional reasoning, I describe this as kind of using an emotional thermometer, and the emotional thermometer kind of helps people misunderstand that if I feel anxious, that means that something bad's going to happen, and that doesn't make sense. So a feeling is a feeling and an action is an action, but feeling a certain way isn't going to dictate that something bad is going to happen. And if you flip it on its side, if you look at something good and if you feel good, it also doesn't necessarily mean that something good is going to happen. So an emotion is an emotion, helping people to understand that. Labeling is putting an I am statement on somebody. I'm not good enough, or I'm bad, or I'm boring, etc. And helping people to understand that these labels might not be useful, and helping them to have a more broader understanding for what that means. Mind reading is classic, where people believe that they know what other people are thinking. And there's lots of little exercises you can do in session or with your clients to help people to debunk this idea. A simple one could be where you get you get a piece of paper and your client gets a piece of paper. And the aim would be to ask the person to do the mind read, or whenever they're in situations, do they think that they know what other people are thinking? And in most cases, they'll say yes. And then what you do is you ask them if you do a little exercise and experiment just to test that out. And what you do is you get the client to mind read you. Okay, so you get the client to write down what they think is in your head. So they write down their answer and you write down what's in your head. And then afterwards you compare answers. And the answers are never the same because the person can't do it. It's quite an impossible task. And what the person also realizes is often the time they're thinking negatively about they think that the therapist or someone else is thinking negatively about them. But often the case, the therapist or the nurse is actually thinking about other stuff which is actually outside of them. So it's a very different thing. It's a very contradictory kind of idea. But it's a really useful tool for people to understand that mind reading does what no one can mind read, that it's quite a difficult task. So just a kind of brief kind of behavioural experiment that you can do whenever you're working with clients. The should statements. So this is really useful, and whenever you're working with clients, to understand what's their rule book, what's their shoulds and shouldn'ts, what sort of things are they doing because they overestimate how dangerous things are going to, how dangerous situations can be. And once you have an understanding of the shoulds, well, then maybe we're able to help them to see that maybe they can relax on their standards, and that it's not going to have the same consequence. Because if you look at it, if I scroll you back again to anxiety and the definition of anxiety, it's looking at two things. I'm overestimating danger and I'm underestimating my ability to cope. And ability to cope is fundamental here, because people might think that they're not going to be able to manage certain situations. And it's just to help them understand that in the past, maybe there are a lot of situations which they can manage also. And we also have on helpful thinking styles. So this is just a list that I give to people. And again, it's to help them to see some of the problems which they may be, some of the mistakes that they've been making in their mind. Another sheet that I got from the same book to the back of the reference list is helping people to cognitively challenge some of their thoughts. Okay, so what they have is they have now a list of thoughts that they have peppered them with some doubt, with some of the cognitive distortions. And now what we're doing is we're helping them to become their own therapist and to challenge some of their thoughts. So we get to ask questions such as, do I know for certain that I'm not going to have anything to say? Am I 100% sure that that person is going to be mean to me or give out to me or whatever? What evidence do I have? And this is a really powerful one, where we're trying to teach clients to become their own little detective in a way. And we're trying to get them to give us evidence for what they believe is happening. And in most cases, they don't have it. They have a feeling, but they don't have any evidence for it. So getting them to challenge their thought patterns rather than just accepting it as being true. Is there another explanation for this? So even though there's a list of maybe 9 different questions there, the person might say, do you know what, I like 2 or 3 of them and that's enough to help me to understand certain things. So a combination of cognitive techniques and also some behavioural techniques can be really, really useful to help the person to overcome this. And it also takes a lot of practice. So practicing outside a session, practicing in session, having talks, writing down material, really, really useful to get it into the person's head and help them to live a different life. So by putting it all together then, if you're looking at the cognitive stuff, this is another example of a really useful tool that people can use. And it's built on the other two kind of examples I've given you, where it's more of an elaborate format, I suppose. So this is where the person might have a little diary and they might put in situation, and their anxiety-provoked situation was starting a conversation with a coworker, okay? And then they wrote down what sort of thoughts was in their head. Thoughts such as, I don't know how to make small talk. They will think that it's strange I'm so talkative, or I'll be nervous. Okay, so that's what was going on in their head. So getting them to become more familiar with their thought patterns. Then what to do is to add in thinking errors. Okay, so you can see thinking errors over here, number 3. And we have all or nothing thinking, black and white, fortune telling, not looking at the positives, the feeling bit, feeling anxious, I'm going to be in danger, mind reading, should and must. The person does is to basically write down some of the mistakes that they're having, that they make. Okay, they can also see like 100 there and little 80%. And this is kind of for the person. Well, I believe I'm going to be nervous 100%. I'm going to believe that I'm not going to be able to make small talk, maybe 85%. So again, it just gives you a good rating on which thought is the strongest. The next part is how the person felt. So the person wrote down there, I felt anxious and I felt a bit irritated, I think it was. Okay, that's fine. So the person's being aware of the thoughts, the errors and the feelings. Next part is a challenging part. What evidence do I have that I don't know how to make small talk? And the person says, well, I have no evidence. I just feel uncomfortable. What evidence do I have that I know how to make small talk? I did the last time. So what you're doing is you're helping the person to, as they learn and as they become more engaged in the process, they start to experience more and more situations, which backs up their ability to do certain things. So these sheets are really useful for the person to use during treatment to help them to become more aware of different patterns. And that's just a better version of what I can see. The two end bits, actually, number 5 and number 6, are really useful because you're looking at more rational responses, key points, rational responses, and what the person achieved. So in terms of CBT, it's very structured, it's very, very goal orientated. And if you have a look at this situation, this is a really good format to help the person to be able to challenge a lot of their thinking patterns, and also come up with more helpful statements of what they can do. That's some of the cognitive stuff that we can do with clients. Cognitive stuff is good, but behavioural stuff, I believe, is more powerful. And behavioural is where the person actually gets involved and starts to do things. Okay, so what we do is we get our clients, and this can start at the very, very beginning of treatment, where clients might say to you certain things that they avoid doing or don't do. And we can spend time trying to figure out or brainstorm all the anxiety situations which makes a person feel anxious, okay? And we create a ladder. So at the top of the ladder is the most anxiety-provoking, and the bottom of the ladder is the least anxiety-provoking. You can also make it maybe avoidance. At the top, I avoid this, and at the bottom, I'm able to do it. So what you're doing really is you're looking at all the different situations. I'm going to give you an example in a minute, but it's really good foundations for doing behavioural work, and it also gives you more information about the client's world. So therefore, you can ask more questions just to really understand what the person is saying and what they're getting at. Okay, so. You write down the list and you pick a situation and expose the person to anxiety while dropping their safety behaviours. This is key. So whenever the person is doing exposure, they have to drop their safety behaviours, otherwise the person isn't learning. Okay. So again, whenever you're building, so for example, some people might do exposure, but then they also might have the phone in their hand just in case. and they might say, yeah, look, I mean, I believe it didn't happen, but then I also had the phone in my hand. So it's about having the person to understand that they need to do the exposure and not charismatic behaviours to really expose them to what they perceive is going to be dangerous. And this, again, can take a lot of talking and negotiation, but it's really important to wipe all those things out. Okay, so exposure. Sorry, I'm going to skip the slide here. Exposure, okay. So exposure therapy is entering an anxiety-provoking situation to allow anxiety to increase and decrease. Habituation, okay? So the person enters a situation, they're aware that their anxiety is going to go up, they're aware that anxiety isn't going to last forever, and they're aware that anxiety will go down by itself, okay? Practice. Practice exposure provides opportunity to practice and learn. So if the person does something once, for example, going into the supermarket and maybe paying for an item, then maybe it's helpful for them to do it again and again and again. But it's all supplemented by learning. So once a person does the task, it's important for them to, I suppose, have a kind of a debrief and see all the things that went well, etc. Every situation that the brain can be manipulated, you know. So if the person has a difficulty, for example, with talking to people, you can have a look at certain situations where they may be able to talk to somebody. Maybe it's a family member which isn't that bad, and help them to gain confidence to a point where they're able to talk to a stranger. And that may take a little bit of time. What you're doing is you're building on the person's own perceived fears, and you're building it up nicely. So it's graded in order of complexity and level of anxiety. Each situation the person brings is quite a complex situation. For example, like I said at the very start, going shopping seems like quite an easy task for most of us, but in other people's lives, it can bring a lot of difficult tasks, such as paying for items, not touch certain items, try not to trip over, holding stuff so you don't get accused of stealing. So it can be quite complicated. But once you understand what the person's world is like, when you're able to slowly build on really useful techniques to be able to help them to challenge their behaviours and their thinking patterns. Exposure therapy also helps people to learn that their fears don't come true. Okay, it's like talking to somebody about riding a horse, but never actually riding a horse. The person isn't going to get used to it unless they've actually gone out and done it for themselves. Identify negative automatic thoughts and hot cognition. So once a person is being exposed, they're going to be very aware of what's going on in their head. But what they'll be supplemented with is a new way of thinking, and they'll be able to think a little bit differently now to give them the tools to be able to do that. And they can test out some of our thinking. For example, some people might say, if there is silence, I won't be able to handle it. So what do? You create silence. You get them into a situation where they don't say anything to test their own belief systems. Okay, so I've talked for the last, I think we're about an hour so far. I've talked for the last hour, and I think I've got through quite a lot of material, but this is where you have an opportunity now to spend a few minutes and write down what's your learning. Okay, so this just reinforce some things which maybe you have in your heads. And I have 5 questions again, which are quite similar to the first round, the very, very start. What I'd like you now to do is to spend 5 minutes and to define anxiety again. How would you explain anxiety to a client? How would you explain social anxiety to a client? What's the stages of social anxiety? What's maintaining your client's social anxiety? And at the moment, what can I do now to help my client with social anxiety? So just take about 5 minutes and have a look at those questions, and then I'll be back to you in a few minutes. Okay, and I'll just move on. So, are there any questions? This is the end of the presentation. Is there any questions that I can answer at the moment? So just open the floor for any questions on it.
James, there is one. I don't know if you've seen it there. It's from Yvonne Doyle, and it's where can you access the CBT worksheets?
Oh, yep. Sorry, let me get on to my next slide there. Here we go. So it is treatment that works. So the ones that I put up there online is a treatment that works series, managing social anxiety, a CBT approach, and that's in the Oxford manual. This one's very, very useful. The treatment that works series is really, really useful. And this is very practical sheets that the clients can use, and the feedback is quite powerful for it. Another book which is very useful is Cognitive Therapy of Anxiety Disorders, a practical manual and conceptual guide. Lots of really good information in this too. So these are the two ones which I kind of recommend. Any other questions on you?
No other questions in the chat box. But everyone, you are welcome to turn on your mic and ask James directly, or you can type it in the chat box and keep an eye on it.
James, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, can you avail of doing CBT courses?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's I think COVID has changed things. There's lots of really good webinars for CBT. I don't know if they're looking for a specific level of expertise, but there's lots of different stuff out there on webinars at the moment. I think Trinity's also running a foundations program, as far as I know, so there could be that could also be a useful place to look.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. No other questions on you?
No questions coming in at the moment, James, but again, we do have a comment here from Connor, and it just says thanks for the presentation. So
Thank you so much.
and if anyone else has anything that they'd like to type in, please feel free. I'll read it out.
Hi, I just had a question there, James, if that's okay. I suppose one of the difficulties I have is with getting people to fill in I work with young people and adolescents, and getting them to fill in the record sheets.
Yes.
I find is the biggest problem. I was wondering if you have any tips for that.
Yeah, it's very common. Young people don't like to do their homework or assignment. That makes sense. Yeah, what I do then is I start off by kind of acknowledging that it's kind of normal for people not to want to do it. And what I do maybe is I'd have a chat instead during the session, and we might try to work it out that way. So the two of us might sit down and try to work out the sheets together in session. Now that's fine, and hopefully to learn from that. But then at the same time, it might also give us more information about the person's learning styles, and maybe there's certain things that they're not getting in terms of our teaching. So maybe we need to spend more time trying to teach them more about how they're able to challenge things. I also use diagrams. I use stick diagrams as well to I suppose add a bit of humor, but also it's more relatable if I draw little diagrams and little thought stuff, little thought bubbles and stuff. Flashcards are really useful as well, to help them with their memory. So if you use flashcards such as, you can get them to write down a little thought, and you can use flashcards to help them to identify some of the problems, some of the thinking errors that they may have had such as mind reading, black and white thinking. And hopefully with some of those foundations, they may then fill out the thought records, during the after exposure exercises. And what I'd be doing in that case is kind of maybe going out with them doing exposure, or else reinforcing how important it is to either write down or else use a kind of some kids text, have like text notes or whatever, and they bring in text notes rather than actually a piece of paper. Use audio notes or whatever, any method that they can use, so long as they're trying to tap into thinking styles, tap into their errors, and also tap into some of the behaviors that they're doing, which may be maintaining the whole problem. I also have parents in sessions, and parents become the kind of co-therapist, and they can also be a really useful resource to challenge the kids in terms of their cognitive thinking, and I suppose do the job when they're outside a session, and just supplement some of their learnings.
Okay, thanks.
Perhaps what you also might find is some people also might be very clueless about certain things, as particularly adolescents, and they might be clueless about how to cue. They might pick up on cues which we may pick up on easily, and maybe it's about having a conversation about what cues they might pick up on in session, and helping the parent to be aware of it, but also the child to be able to open up to the parent and ask them certain things. Like, they mightn't understand cues, they mightn't understand certain body language. There's certain things that they mightn't which we assume they know, but then as you get more into the details of it, they really present it as struggling in that area. And it can be really fascinating whenever we all learn this, because then at least then what we can do is we can scaffold, we can help the parents to check in with the kids and to help them to understand what's the best way of interacting.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
No worries.
We just have another comment in there from Natalia, and she just said, thank you very much for the presentation today, James.
Thank you, Natalia. You're very good. Thanks to yourselves as well, and you're very kind to offer this.
James, just if you can hear me again, it's Yvonne.
Hi, Yvonne.
I remember we used to do like for nurses in the community. There was actually a really good website that it kind of shows pictures on CBT and worksheets.
Yes.
That was called getselfhelp.co.uk.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that one very good. Like, is there any other websites?
Yes. I'm a big fan of the CCI. It's the Centre for Clinical Interventions. It's an Australian website. It's free. It's free also. So
what is it? Sorry.
It's CCI. So it's a Centre for Clinical Interventions. Okay. So if you Google, for example, CCI social anxiety, what it'll do is it'll bring you onto the website, and I think it's actually better than Get Self-Help in that what it does is it breaks down lots of different conditions into workbook format. So yourself, you can go to the workbook, which is free, and there's also like a little fact sheets as well, which is free as well. So it's a really useful way of just using resources.
Okay, brilliant. That's lovely. I'll look that up. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation.
That one and Get Self-Help. There's also one as well called Psychological Tools, but you have to pay a subscription for that one there. But it's also very useful. That's psychologytools.org, I think, or something. It costs about €100, but it's really useful for the workbooks. But to be honest, I think I'd stick with CCI. They're quite good.
Brilliant. Thanks a million.
Props.
Thanks.
Thanks, James. It's Aisling here. I just had a quick thought. It's a while since I've worked clinically, but I do remember a number of young children came to us with tics, vocal tics, which was kind of grounded in that whole. Actually, there were 2 or 3 of them hadn't long started school, so it was kind of, in our estimation at the time, it was kind of linked to that whole new world of starting school, and as against I suppose a long-term tic issue, but it was a vocal tic, and I just wondered, in your opinion, do you come across that much yourself in terms of your own practice, or do you see it in any way linked to social anxiety? Obviously, there's other reasons for tics, and I know that, but I just remember on this particular occasion with 2 or 3 little ones, and yeah, this is becoming an issue for them.
Yeah, really good question. I haven't come across it that much. I think maybe I've come across it twice. But what I'd be curious about is I've been going back to the basics of CBT. So we're trying to understand, do the tics all the time? Is there particular times that the tics get worse? Is there kind of thinking behind the tics, the actions that they do? So I don't know. Again, I try to really understand the person's world and what that's about. Social anxiety and tics. I don't know if I've come across that, but again, it's really fascinating because you can never really predict what the person's doing until you ask, until you try to step into the world, and then you learn so much about it. But I haven't really had that much. It hasn't opened the door that much, to be honest.
It's quite a challenge when they're wee ones, you know, and they're very small, like because you are trying to get into what the worry is or what the worry, you know, and even things like the worry box and stuff, they're nearly too small for it, you know. So
of course,
it's a challenge. It's lots of Lego and stuff. But I just wondered, had you come across it much? As I said, it's a while since I've worked clinically, but you know, as you say, the different mechanisms people use, whether we're young, small, big, whatever, you know, it can be as simple as that, you know, just learn behaviors that we put in place when we're not so sure of our environment.
100%. I'd also be kind of wondering when this started off, was there, you know, is there any trauma in the background? When did the whole thing start off? Those are questions I'd be kind of curious about.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, James. And I have to tell you, really excellent presentation. Hugely practical, very thought-provoking. For somebody like myself, hasn't worked in the area in a while, I'm back there, you know. So you really kind of hit the nail on the head, and some very strategic ways of thinking and stepping out stuff. You know, rather than looking in the hole. But I guess that's your forte, you know, that breaking things down and helping us look at the issues and the problems and history taking and just digging and finding different ways of trying to work through that, you know. So much appreciated.
100%. I suppose history taking as well. I mean, you talked about a really important point. History taking doesn't stop at history taking at the very start. History taking continues on the whole way through it. No, I think it's been great. So thank you for that feedback.
I'm not sure. Had we any other questions for you, James? I don't see any. Do you see any on you there by any chance? No.
No more questions, but a few more messages of thanks, James, for today.
Yeah.
Okay. Will we close it off?
Yeah, if you're happy to finish up and colleagues are happy to.
I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you for your nice comments, and thank you, ladies, for facilitating this.
Thank you, James. 100%, as I said, in terms of both practical and thought-provoking and really good resources mentioned there for colleagues as well in terms of accessing other tools and websites for work through it every day, you know, so that's always very handy to have when you need to in your own toolkit.
Exactly, and it's free, so why not?
Why not, exactly, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, everybody. Mind yourselves and see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
And Anya has sent you the details for next week again, and we'll be sending it out with P&A. So we'll be joining with Kevin McKenna. So hope to see you around this time next week for week 2 of the summer webinars. So bye, James, and thanks ever so much again. Mind yourself. Bye-bye.